Clay McCallum rode into Dry Creek like a ghost from a storm. His horse was tired, the saddle worn, and the only sound for miles was the creak of leather and the soft jingle of his spurs. He didn't come for trouble. He didn't come for stories. He came for flour, beans, and medicine, but everything changed when he saw her. She was standing on the edge of town, a thin, pale woman in a torn wedding dress. Her veil was dirty, and her eyes looked like they hadn't held sleep in weeks. The wind played with her long brown hair, and she stood there as if she didn't belong anywhere except in someone's memory. Her voice was so soft Clay almost didn't hear it. "Please have mercy," she whispered. Clay pulled the reins. The horse stopped. He studied her with the calm, careful eyes of a man who'd lived through too much to trust anything right away. His instinct said, "Walk away." His heart said, "Stay." She was like a flower wilting in the heat of a cruel sun. And guilty or not, Clay had never been the kind of man to ignore someone that broken. "Ma'am, you all right?" he asked, stepping down. She didn't answer. She stared past him at the road behind him like she expected the devil to ride in any second. He followed her gaze. The horizon was empty. Clay looked back at her and realized something wasn't just wrong. Something was coming. Clay had been a father for 8 years and a widow for 3. Ever since Emma died, he'd done everything to protect their daughter, Lily. She was the only soft thing in his hard world. Clay had no room for anyone else, no time for strangers, but now looking at that desperate woman, something old and buried inside him stirred. "Name's Clay," he said quietly. "Clay McCallum, can you tell me what happened?" She opened her mouth, then closed it like the words hurt too much to form. Her skin was pale, lips cracked from thirst. Clay stepped closer. That's when he noticed the bruises on her wrists, the marks of rope, the broken look in her eyes. "My name is Hope," she finally whispered. "Hope Whittaker, they're coming for me. I was supposed to be his wife, but I ran." Clay's jaw tightened. "Whose wife?" Quote. Hope looked at him then. Really looked like she was trying to decide whether she should run again or fall at his feet. "His name is Beaumont Crane," she said. "A man they called the King of Ash Hollow." Clay had heard the name, everyone had. Beaumont Crane wasn't just a wealthy rancher. He was a monster. People whispered he owned sheriffs, judges, and every mile of land between Dry Creek and Ash Hollow. His word was law where law didn't reach. And his women they never left alive. Hope's voice shook as she spoke. "He bought me from my own family. I was taken to marry him yesterday, but I escaped before the vows. They're hunting me." Clay felt the old ache in his chest, the kind of pain only men who have lost everything understand. But this wasn't his fight. He told himself that he had to get supplies, get back to his girl, and keep moving. He'd stayed off trouble's path for years, but Hope fell to her knees. "If they find me," she whispered, "I'll die." Clay looked away. The sun was starting to fall. Dry Creek was quiet, like the people saw them from behind curtains, but didn't want to be seen caring. Clay closed his eyes. Lily's face came to mind, her small hands around his, her voice asking, "Daddy, will you always protect me?" He opened his eyes. "Get up," he said. Hope looked confused. "I ain't leaving you here," Clay said firmly, "but if we're going to run, we got to move now, and you better be ready to tell me everything." For the first time, Hope's eyes filled with something other than fear. It was trust, the kind you give only when you have nothing left to lose. Clay helped her onto the horse, and they rode toward the McCallum cabin just a few miles beyond the ridge. The sky burned red as the sun sank, and the wind carried a warning. Far behind them on the empty road, 3 dark riders crested the hill. They wore black dusters. Their hats cast long shadows, and leading them was a man with a silver-tipped cane and a smile that never touched his eyes. Beaumont Crane had arrived. Clay didn't know it yet, but he had just declared war. And this war would cost him everything he had left, or give him back something he thought he'd lost forever. Clay's cabin stood at the edge of a pine grove, tucked far enough from town to stay unseen, but close enough to hear when trouble came calling. The wooden porch creaked as Clay helped Hope down from the horse. He could feel her trembling even as she tried to stand firm. What she'd run from had stripped her spirit raw. But something in her eyes, a small, warm flame, told him she hadn't given up yet. Not completely. Inside, the cabin smelled like coffee grounds and pine smoke. Lily ran in from the back room, her blonde hair tied in a loose braid, her eyes bright as daybreak. "Daddy, you're back," she said, throwing her arms around him. Clay hugged her tight like he always did, then stepped back and introduced Hope. "This is Miss Hope," he said gently. "She's going to stay with us a while." Lily looked up at the stranger with simple curiosity. "Are you sick?" she asked. Hope forced a small smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. Very tired." Quote. Clay gave Hope his late wife's quilt and told her to rest in the spare room. As he walked away, he could feel Hope's gratitude like a weight in the room. She was safe for the moment, but Clay knew that moment wouldn't last. Later that night, after Lily went to sleep, Clay stood alone on the porch with his rifle. He stared into the dark, riding down from the ridge. He could almost smell the ash and gunpowder on the wind. Men like Beaumont Crane weren't the type to wait. They didn't knock. They broke doors, they burned worlds. Hope walked out quietly. The moonlight turned her dress to silver. She looked smaller now, wrapped in the old quilt, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Don't know how to thank you," she said in a quiet voice. Clay didn't turn. "Don't thank me yet. He'll come," Hope whispered. "He'll come with his men, he won't stop." Clay stayed silent. He had seen violence before. He once carried death like a shadow. Back then he lived with a pistol at his hip and a prayer on his lips. His guns had names, justice and regret. He thought he had left that life behind, but life wasn't done with him. "Why'd you run?" Clay finally asked. Hope looked out across the dark, her voice shaking like old wood in the wind. "My family was broke. My father drank." One night, Beaumont Crane's men came with papers and money. He said he'd give my father land and pay off his debts if I agreed to be his bride. They said I'd be safe, cared for, but when I saw what he really was, I knew I'd die there. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing. I ran before he could lay his hands on me. I didn't care what happened to me next. I just couldn't stay. Clay looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't just running from a man. She was running from a life that meant nothing. A cage dressed up like a dream. He saw the same fire in her that he once saw in Emma, his wife, that wild, desperate belief in freedom. "You made the right choice," he said quietly. Before Hope could answer, the sound of hooves broke the silence. Clay's eyes narrowed. Hope froze. A lantern burned near the tree, faint but growing closer. "Stay inside," Clay said. Hope hesitated. Her eyes begged him not to face this alone. But Clay stepped off the porch, his boots sinking into the dirt, his rifle heavy in his hands. Old instincts woke up like they'd never slept. 3 riders came into view. They weren't hunting quietly anymore. They wanted to be seen. Their horses were black as coal, their faces hidden beneath wide-brim hats. The man in the middle held a silver-tipped cane. Even from a distance, Clay knew who he was. Beaumont Crane. Crane smirked like a man who already owned the ground he was standing on. "Night, McCallum," he called out. His voice was smooth like oil on water. "I hear you've got something that belongs to me." Clay raised the rifle slightly. "You got the wrong place." Crane chuckled. "Funny thing, I don't forget my property. And that woman you're hiding, she's worth more than all the beans in that little cabin of yours." Clay stepped forward into the moonlight. "She ain't property, and she sure as hell ain't yours." Crane's smile faded. His eyes turned cold. "You're a fool, McCallum," he said softly. "And fools die in the wilderness." Clay didn't speak. The 2 men stared at each other across the yard, the night holding its breath. Finally, Crane tipped his hat and backed his horse into the shadows. "You have until sunrise," he said. "When the sun breaks over those hills, I'm coming back, and when I do, I'll burn everything you love to the ground." The riders disappeared into the darkness. Clay stood alone, breathing hard but steady. He watched until the last sound of hooves faded. Inside, Hope stood just beyond the doorway, her eyes wide with dread. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. Clay looked back at her. His voice was low but clear. "Whatever I have to." The night suddenly felt thin like a candle in a storm, and dawn was coming. The sky was a dark shade of violet when Clay opened his eyes. He hadn't slept, not even for a breath. The fire in the hearth burned low, and the old cabin walls seemed to hold their breath with him. Outside, a thin mist hovered over the grass, like a sheet laid gently over the land before dawn. This was the kind of morning when men made peace with their fate. Clay checked his rifle. He cleaned it slow, careful, like a ritual he hadn't performed since the war. Then he loaded his revolver. Every click echoed like a promise in the quiet cabin. Hope stood in the doorway wrapped in Emma's quilt. Her face was pale, but calm in a way Clay hadn't seen before. "Can run," Clay said without looking up. "If I distract them at the ridge, you and Lily can take the horse and go south through the pines. There's a wagon trail. You'll make it to Cross Bend by nightfall." Hope shook her head slowly. "I'm not running anymore. I ran once. It nearly cost me my soul. You saved me so I could live, not hide." Clay finally met her eyes. He saw the same fire Emma once had, and he couldn't deny what he already knew. "Then you'll do as I say," he said gently. Hope nodded. When Lily woke, Clay held her close, longer than usual. He brushed her hair behind her ear and looked into her eyes, blue like her mother's. "Lily," he said quietly, "no matter what happens today, you stay with Hope. She'll keep you safe." Lily frowned. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" Clay smiled and kissed her forehead. "I'm just doing what daddies do." He stood, walked to the door, and stepped into the growing light. The sun was just starting to break over the ridge when Clay saw them. 10 riders came over the hill like a black tide. Beaumont Crane led them, riding tall in a dark coat, silver cane resting across his saddle. His men spread out like wolves closing in. Clay stood alone in the yard, rifle in hand. The wind blew through the pines, and in that moment Clay felt peace, a strange, fierce peace. He had run from violence for years, and still it had found him. But this time he wasn't fighting for pride or anger. He was fighting for love. Crane dismounted slowly, his boots tapping on the earth like a judge's gavel. He looked around, expecting fear, hopping for it. "You could have given her up," Crane said, "but you chose to throw your life away." Clay held the rifle steady. "Some things are worth dying for." Crane's jaw tightened. He nodded once. "Kill him." Quote. Before the order finished leaving his lips, Clay fired. The shot struck one of Crane's men clean in the chest. He dropped and chaos erupted. Gunfire ripped through the air. Clay moved with a grace born of old battles. He took cover behind the wagon. One shot, two shots, three men fell like shadows in the morning light. But for everyone Clay hit, another came forward. Bullet smoke filled the yard. A window shattered. The porch splintered. Hope grabbed Lily and rushed them into the cellar. Her hands trembling but steady. Crane advanced, bitter fury burning in his eyes. He fired once, grazing Clay's shoulder. Another shot tore into the doorframe, inches from Clay's head. Clay knew he was running out of time and bullets. He took a breath and remembered Emma. He remembered her laugh, her soft voice, the way she looked at him the day Lily was born. He wasn't ready to die, but if he did, he would die like a man his daughter would remember. Clay stepped into the open. He aimed at Crane. A shot rang out. Crane fired at the same time. Clay was thrown backward. He crashed to the ground, blood soaking through his shirt. Crane staggered, clutching his side. Clay's bullet had found its mark. Not fatal, but deep. Crane dropped to one knee, breathing hard. He looked at Clay and smiled a horrible smile. "You think this ends with you?" Crane hissed. "I built a kingdom, I own counties, you're nothing." Clay, coughing blood, raised his head with the last strength he had. "You don't own her," he rasped. "You never will." Hope appeared behind Crane, trembling but holding a rifle Clay had kept above the mantel. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady. "I'm done being afraid," she said. Crane turned too late. The gunshot echoed through the trees. Crane collapsed, silent, still. It was over. Hours later, the sun sat high in the sky. The gunham's smoke had cleared. Crane's bodies lay scattered, pieces of a broken empire. Clay McCallum lay in the grass, his breathing shallow. Hope pressed cloth to his wound, tears running down her face. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please stay." Quote. Clay looked up at her, then at Lily standing beside her. Their faces soft, lit by sunlight like a promise. He smiled weakly. "I'm here." For the first time since Emma's death, Clay felt something like hope. A new life was beginning. And in the ruins of violence, a family had been.